All right. It's time for Buckeye Grove Instant Access.
It's about time.
With the latest breaking news, analysis, and much, much more from around the world of Ohio State. Brought to you by BuckeyeGrove.com and the Unscripted Ohio Podcast Network.
You're so money and you don't even know it.
Let's move quickly and hand it off to our host, Kevin Noon.
It's time to start running!
Hey, thanks for joining us. We are here sitting on the second open week of the schedule. I am your host, Kevin Noon. Of course, joined by the best interns out there on the Buckeye Beat, Braden Moles and Keaton Maisano, as we join you some from an undisclosed location on campus because they're not paying us any money for advertising. I'm not going to give them anything. And, we're recording this on a Tuesday after having a chance to listen to Ryan Day and a couple players speak. And, I think that Buckeyes are sitting 8-0, and it's, they're in a very comfortable position right now. They get a week to relax a little bit. I mean, unfortunately, pretty much everybody of consequence is taking the open week this week as well, too, so it won't be a crazy weekend of games. But, I think it's coming at a good time. What say you, Keaton?
Yeah, I think it's coming at a perfect time. We've heard from a lot of the players because of the extra open week about how nice it is to, get your body healthy, kind of take some time off. But I think it also allows Ohio State to get back to the basics, which is what Ryan Day has been stressing for this open week, is getting back to the basics, making sure there's no distractions, making sure that the team stays focused. And I think this open week comes at a good time, especially after a big game against Wisconsin. It came at a good time last time when it was following the Michigan State game. So I think this will only benefit the Buckeyes and I think teams around the country.
I think you could certainly make the argument that it would have been nice for Ohio State to kind of carry that momentum from the Wisconsin win into Maryland, into Rutgers, and then eventually into Penn State. But, watching Justin Fields walk off the field after taking 5 sacks, kind of, limping, walking slowly up to the podium, it's probably good for him and for Ryan Day for them to have a week off, rest, and recover as Ohio State gets ready to go into this, not so much the next 2 games against Maryland and Rutgers, but after that, Penn State and Michigan, that kind of last stretch of the season.
After the game, we really broke down the Wisconsin game. I don't think there's a reason for us to go directly over that game line by line. But now that they're sitting here at 8 weeks or 8 games, we had a chance to kind of break down the team after 6. I don't think that there's enough value in us being able to just go through the same questions at this point. But what are some of the overriding thoughts that you have of this team now at this point? I think that even after 6 weeks, there were a lot of questions of, well, have they faced a real test? I mean, really, what is there? I mean, they only played 2 games in the stretch before this second open week, but have we learned more about this team? Do you feel more confident in saying, I know what this team's about? I think I understand who they are based on just, a couple more games, but one of them really being that biggest game to date, the Wisconsin game.
Yeah, I think all the things that we were thinking about this team, about the good defense, about the way the offense has been playing, has only been confirmed by going up against a team like Wisconsin who is able to push back on a team like Ohio State. And Ohio State still was able to pull away in the second half. The offensive line play, which I think you couldn't really learn totally until you play a team like a Michigan State defensive line or a Wisconsin defensive line. You can't really learn a lot about them until they go up against those opponents, and they looked very good in that game. And then the defense, Wisconsin's rushing attack is no joke, and Ohio State almost made it look like they were playing some lower-level opponent, the way that they were able to lock up Jonathan Taylor, who's one of the best backs in the country, and he'll be drafted pretty high as a result of that. And then, Ohio State is a very good team with no deficiencies, but they also have really good stars that carry their team. They have Chase Young, they got Justin Fields, they got J.K. Dobbins among the group of players who are playing really well. Jeff Okudah can also be thrown in there too. But this team, there's really no weakness, and they also have star players who can rise up in the big games and get the job done.
I think this was obviously a great game for Chase Young, 4 sacks, and J.K. Dobbins, 163 yards on the ground. But I think the Wisconsin game and, kind of going up to the Wisconsin game, this is a big stretch for Ryan Day because it showed that his teams will be able to rise to the level of competition. Because, the competition had not been great going up into the Wisconsin game, and Ohio State had kind of steamrolled over all those opponents. But seeing them able to continue that kind of dominance against a good team arguably a great team like Wisconsin before the game, great team like Wisconsin like that, it was really impressive to see Ohio State go into that game and just basically play them like they played their game, basically, like they have against every other team this season. So, I think it bodes well for their upcoming games against Penn State and Michigan, and then the rematch against Wisconsin or maybe even Minnesota in the Big Ten Championship.
We had the opportunity to talk with Ryan, as I said earlier today, and a lot of talk about individual accolades, Heisman coming up for more than one player at that point. And Ryan was, just as predicted, really tried to dismiss all of that. It's all taken away with a loss along the way. Got to try and insulate ourselves from that kind of stuff. I've done this for a long time. I've seen these types of seasons start to come together. A player or two really get, people gravitate around them as being a top player. We're not talking about a team that has just a ton of undefeated seasons at this point. Things come up along the way, doesn't always get there. But, how do you think this team is going to do in terms of trying to drown out all that white noise out there about awards and whatnot? This isn't just a case of Buckeye Grove is saying this, or the Fan, or Channel 6 or Channel 10. You've got Paul Feinbaum coming out there and saying Ohio State's the best team in the country. I'm sure that pains him all the way down to his Bama underoos to have to say those types of things. How do you think a team is going to go with this? Because even 10 years ago, we weren't dealing with social media in the way that we are today. This is a very connected generation. You guys are a member of this generation as undergraduates here at The Ohio State University. How do you think they're going to go about that?
Well, I think, with anything like this stuff pops up, and I think Ryan Day admitted that. He said when you're at an institution like Ohio State and the football is this big, this stuff's going to pop up. And this is his first time going through it as a head coach, so I think you're going to get to learn a lot about Ryan Day. The difference between the good coaches and the great coaches is if they can keep their teams focused. But I think you can't put too much responsibility on Ryan Day because it also comes down to the leadership of this team. You have Chase Young, you have other upperclassmen who need to show that, hey, I'm not going to put the team aside to chase some individual accolades. So I think that they have a lot of good leaders on this team that are going to be able to focus on the team and keep the train rolling, per se. And I don't think that the way that they've performed in the past, the way they've been tripped up in the past, getting distracted, I think that almost fuels this team to continue going. I think they haven't proven anything yet. They have had seasons that have gotten to this point before, and then they got tripped up, and they've gotten rewarded for nothing as far as getting a national championship or anything. So I think that the mantra the entire year has been to stay focused week by week, divide each week, and just try to accomplish the goals for that week. And that's what Ryan Day's been doing before this point. I'm assuming that's what he'll do after this point. And I don't see any reason why Ohio State has shown any signs that they're going to stop doing that going forward.
Yeah, I agree with Keaton. There has been a consistent message from Ryan Day the entire season, ever since he was hired back in January to the press conference he gave today about just staying focused on the next competitor. Everybody just needs to do their job, and I think and like Kevin had said, in today's age, J.K. Dobbins tweeted something I think like 30 minutes after the Wisconsin game finished, so it's inevitable he's going to get on Twitter. He's going to see mentions of hashtag JK for Heisman, stuff like that. That is an inevitability, and like Keaton said, especially going into Ohio State, that's going to happen. You're going to have those heightened expectations, and possibly even from outside media, like even Paul Feinbaum, maybe hearing that you're a Heisman candidate. But I think today was a really great indicator of how this team is handling that pressure, because Justin Fields, who had not even heard Ryan Day talk earlier today about how, nobody's focused on individual accolades or Heisman talk or whatever it may be, Fields himself said, that he's not focused on any, that he's not worried about, Heisman talk or, winning individual awards. They're all focused on the goal of, getting better every single week and working for that national championship.
When, we're going to finish up this first segment with a couple of quick questions right here. We're sitting here at 8 games into the season. What has surprised you most about this team from day one to where we stand right now in a positive? And what is your biggest concern going in, into this final 4-game stretch? It could, Ohio State could have as many as 7 games if they make it to the college football championship game. So, one positive and one negative.
I think the positive would be the way that Justin Fields is taking care of the football. I think that people were expecting the offense to be able to score some points, but I don't think they saw it at the efficient rate that Ohio State's been doing it at. Justin Fields not turning the ball over, which is really a good help to the defense. Puts defense in a good position, even if when Ohio State punts, which is not that often. The defense is always in good field position to play some defense. So that would be the positive. I think the one concern, when you're nitpicking for stuff, maybe the punting game I think was a little bit off against Wisconsin, but that could also be put down to the weather and how that was going. But just shoring that kind of stuff up, because when you get into those tight games, the game's tight, and you're playing against the better opponents, every little thing matters a lot more, and especially special teams. And I think Hobble's been doing really well. He's gotten 2 good kicks to go the last couple of games, and Chrisman I think is one of the best in the country. So I think he'll get that corrected, and I'm sure Ryan Day has talked about that before, so I think they'll be fine.
I think easily the most surprising thing, or I guess the most positive thing about the team so far through the first 8 games is how the linebackers have played. So, that was one of the biggest pain points last season among one of the statistically worst-ranked defenses in Ohio State history. But just the way that Jeff Hafley and the defense and Greg Madison, everybody has worked together to help kind of reinvigorate that defense with basically the exact same players. It's been really impressive how they've been able to have that turnaround. And then it's not so much a negative, but more of a concern. Justin Fields has not had to win a game yet with his arm. J.K. Dobbins has gone off for, he's averaging like 138 yards or something per game. The defense is holding opponents to a ridiculous points per game average. So while Fields has obviously been very impressive through the first 8 games, there has not been a game yet where his back has been against the wall and he has to make those tough throws, to convert. Obviously, he's a great third down conversions, but his back has not been against the wall. He's not had to make that play for his team to be in position to win a game. So I think when you get into the games against Penn State and Michigan, you're really going to see what Justin Fields is made of when he's going to have to throw the ball to win.
I think my biggest surprise is the offensive line and how they've come together. I'm not going to take anything away from any previous offensive lines, but everybody was so quick to point out 4 new starters, which, if you've listened to the show, I've been quick to say, well, Jonah Jackson may be a new starter at Ohio State, but he's not a new starter. He was a captain at Rutgers. Wyatt Davis had some experience. Josh Alabi, who's been hurt here recently, he's had some experience. Brandon Bowen was a one-time starter at guard, so it wasn't necessarily like they were rolling out 4 new guys. But, this line has played so well, and it was brought up today, and it's something I think we've all noticed, that this isn't a line that makes a lot of mistakes in terms of false starts or holding calls or things along those lines. There have been some sprinkled along the way. That's just football. I think that if you really look at game film, there's holding on pretty much every play. It's just how it is. It's just a matter of knowing what you can get away with, where your hand placement needs to be, things along those lines. So this line has played so well. They were certainly tested just based on the nature of the Wisconsin game, with Justin Fields getting sacked 5 times. Some of that, you have to put on Justin Fields for his, for maybe his clock not going off quickly enough or whatnot. But, you can't put all of that on the line. So I think that the line play has been one of my biggest surprises. When it comes to the other side, I'm going to kind of dovetail a little bit off of what Braden said, and I think it's just a matter of the test. It really is. I've talked about it before, and Ohio State gets this test, and they pass it too well with a 97%, and then it's like, well, that test wasn't that tough, so on and so forth. And everybody's denigrating Clemson and how Clemson hasn't played anybody and how they're not going to be tested. They're not going to be battle-tested when it comes time to be in the playoff or whatnot. Has Ohio State been there? I certainly feel like Ohio State's played a tougher level of competition, especially on the defensive side of the ball, with the Michigan States, with the Wisconsins out there. That Cincinnati win is looking better and better as each week goes by. They will be tested in those final 8 quarters of the season with Penn State and Michigan there. But, where we stand right now, it's all come so easy. And, and I say that with, a little hesitation there, because it's never as easy as it looks to us fans. We see it and whatnot, or media members, and we see this, that, and the other. But, you don't know what goes into that. We see the finished product. We don't see the practice and whatnot. So with that being said, these next 4 games, and truthfully the next 2, mean nothing to me in terms of Maryland and Rutgers. They're just going to be a good excuse to get out there and get some calisthenics and spend some time with some friends and whatnot. They're not going to be much of games, but those final 2 games are going to mean a lot. But, we'll talk about a couple more topics when we get back on the other side of the BIA podcast. Hague Water Conditioning has been treating well in city water in Central Ohio with American-made water filtration products for over 60 years. Have a water quality problem? The water treatment experts at Hague know how to solve it. Not sure if your water softener is working? They will test, inspect, and sanitize any brand of water softener for only $20. Schedule a system checkup or water test today by calling 614-836-2195 or visit them online at HagueH2O.com. That's HAGUE H2O.com. Welcome back. Let's jump into some bigger picture things right now. The Big Ten West is in a little bit of disarray right now. Wisconsin, loser of 2 in a row. Minnesota sitting undefeated right now. It's shaping up a huge game with Penn State coming up here in a couple of weeks. I think, if you talk to an Ohio State person, they have a feeling like they know how the Big Ten East is shaping up. That Penn State game is going to mean everything at this point. What are your thoughts on the West?
Yeah, I mean, Minnesota's been a surprise. I think really the first couple of games that they played, it was all by one possession, so people weren't giving them a lot of credit. But lately they've been really taking care of business. And I think the one thing that you can really point to as Minnesota's saving grace maybe for the season is that they do get to play their big games at home. Really the only tough road game they have left is to go to Iowa, and then the big matchup at the end of the year is against Wisconsin at home. So that could play in Minnesota's favor, but I'm expecting Wisconsin to rebound and try to play better, and they'll definitely have that Minnesota game circled. So if I had to predict right now, I'd say there would be a rematch between Ohio State and Wisconsin in the Big Ten championship game.
It's difficult to say because I think Minnesota is a good team, ranked 13th in the country. Now, obviously, that doesn't happen by accident. PJ Fleck has done a nice job of recruiting lately, bringing in good guys and kind of helping to turn that place around. But my concern when looking at Minnesota is their schedule has not been good at all. Their best win is probably Nebraska at home. And that it's just not really, they played San Diego State, Fresno State, Georgia Southern. It's not been a very inspiring schedule for Minnesota. So when they, in a couple weeks when they step, Penn State comes into their stadium, I don't know how I see that one going. I mean, I think Penn State could really run away with that one because, Penn State has been a lot more battle-tested this season. But the saving grace for Minnesota here is that with that 2-game lead in the West, they still play Iowa, Penn State, and Wisconsin. If they can beat Iowa, beat one of Penn State or Wisconsin, they'll still have a 1-game lead and a buffer if they were to lose one of those games. So I think they put themselves in a really nice spot here to take the Big Ten West, though I'm not sure if they're the best team in that half of the conference.
Yeah, the way I kind of look at it right now is I think that Minnesota certainly is flawed in some ways. Honestly, it's really a 1.5 game lead if you look at it, because if they drop one and then they lose the head-to-head, then if they're both sitting at 2 losses at that point, then Wisconsin would have the edge. The problem is I'm not convinced that Wisconsin is going to be able to completely rebound after the couple of losses. I don't think a lot of Wisconsin fans, honestly felt that it was necessarily going to be a high probability win game against Ohio State, but nobody saw the Illinois game happening, and Ohio State certainly showed the path to how to really slow down the Badgers. I don't think that Jack Cohn is suddenly going to become something that he isn't. Obviously his numbers going into the game were very different, but I think that if you really kind of sell out on the run to force him to beat you, I don't know if he's going to be able to do that. So while I think Minnesota probably still has a couple of losses in it, I think Wisconsin may have another one too along the way, and I don't have their schedule in front of me right now. Braden is helping me out right there. Honestly, that Iowa game could be scary. Iowa can muddy it up, can play some defense. Nebraska's horrible. Purdue is horrible, and then of course you have the head-to-head game. So that Iowa game is going to mean everything right there. But then you could sit there and be looking at a Big Ten West champion sitting there with a couple of losses. That's not going to help whoever's coming out of the East when we talk about the college football playoff, which leads me right into the next situation. I think if the Big Ten champion is 13-0, there's not an issue. I think even 12-1 is fine. I don't think that they need to have that extra data point of having a ranked opponent there. The first college football playoff rankings are coming out November 5th. We're not going to have a BIA show between now and then, so make your prediction. Who's going to be number one? And where is Ohio State going to rank if those are two different answers?
Okay. So I think that number 1 is going to be LSU, and I think Ohio State will be slotted right behind them with the Crimson Tide at 3, and then I think they'll have maybe Penn State or Clemson at 4. I would say Penn State's more deserving of the 4 spot, but in the past they usually like to put the teams that have won the championship in the past who are struggling a little bit but still undefeated at that 4 slot like they did with Florida State. So I'd say Clemson would be at 4 then.
I believe Ohio State will be number 1 when the poll first comes out. I mean, currently the AP poll, number 1, 2, and 3 are all separated by a total of 8 points, which is, I believe, the fewest points ever separating the top 3 teams. So I think when these, when the committee is given the chance to kind of reorder these teams, I think Ohio State will be on top for approximately 1 week before the LSU-Bama winner will jump Ohio State. So I think even if Ohio State is the number 1 team in the country, I don't think it's going to last for very long because it's difficult to not put the winner of, a 2-3 matchup over the number 1 team in the country.
Well, anybody who read my 3-2-1 series will see that I predict Ohio State will be the number 1 team in the first rankings. I kind of agree with Braden that it may be a little bit difficult for them to sit there just based on the schedule that's there, but the truth of the matter is when you look at the overall strength of schedule, Ohio State holds an edge right there in terms of that metric, and I'm not just necessarily talking Sagarin. There are multiple SOSs out there that have Ohio State's strength of schedule higher at this point. I mean, to LSU's credit, in that the typical SEC slack-off week, they play Arkansas, which almost is like playing an FCS team. They're like 1-23 in SEC play over the last 24, but they're at least not going out and playing Western Carolina the way that Alabama is. If you look at the computer polls, which were part of the old BCS formula, Ohio State and LSU pretty much round out number 1 in all of those, with Ohio State taking more of them than LSU. To get to Keaton's point, Penn State is much higher than Clemson. Clemson's 7th in some, 9th in others. So it'll be really interesting to see how the committee in Grapevine, Texas, uses that data, debates it, and then interprets it, because we never know what the identity of this committee is going to be like. We don't know what's going to be important from them year to year. There is some, pretty steady churn with your 2-year terms that you have on there. You just wonder if maybe they get from Bill Hancock a little bit of a different directive at different points of what should be important or whatnot. So you just never really know for sure. But I think just based on everything we've seen, where the computers are using all of these, the SP Plus, the FPI, the blah, 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 ELO chess, so on and so forth, Ohio State is just ahead of the pack. Just to finish, one final thought on this. Do you have faith, by the time it's all said and done, not talking week 1 rankings, but going all the way through the championship games of the conferences, do you have faith in the committee and the process and the way that the selection is done?
I think in the past there's been some inconsistencies, so I think if you're a team outside the SEC, the mindset has to be to take care of business and don't leave it up to chance. I think Ohio State would be best served just to win out their games, but I think with Oklahoma tripping up, I think that opens the door for maybe a 1-loss Big Ten team to really feel safe. But, I mean, in the past, the committee's been very inconsistent. I mean, there's been years where they've stressed the out-of-conference schedule as the reason they leave a team out, but then the next year they'll stress something else. So I think that the committee needs to lay out some rules this year and then just stay consistent week by week. And I think by the end, I think they will get the best 4 teams in, and I think you just got to trust the process on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's difficult to trust the committee after the past few years because, I think while in general, it seems they've gotten the top 4 teams right most of the time, the selection parameters they've used have just been very inconsistent from year to year, but they have consistently used the single best parameter in college football, and that is teams that do not lose. For LSU, Bama, Ohio State, Clemson, it's extremely simple. If they win out, they're in. So I think, you can talk as much as you want about, whether the committee's using strength of schedule, strength of record, common opponents, whatever it may be. It simply just comes down to win. And while that may sound simplified, that's the easy way to get around any of the, some would say poor selection of the committee over the past few years.
Just a couple of interesting factoids, too, that I uncovered as I was putting 3-2-1 together. in the 5 years leading up, the first 5 years of the college football playoff poll, the number one team in the initial rankings has made the playoff 4 out of 5 years. Mississippi State is the only team not to make it. Of all the teams to be ranked number one overall in the first ranking, their record in terms of national championships, 0-5. The number one team in the first rankings has not won the national championship yet. We'll see if it's Ohio State. We'll see who's there and whatnot. It'll be interesting. I'm going to reverse the order here in a little bit because as we were getting ready to start recording this podcast, the NC2A came out with some interesting news. The name, likeness, image, that whole debate has been, burning bright. California had its legislation. There are other states that are going around with it as well, too. We knew that Gene Smith was part of a committee that was getting ready to present to Board of Governors or whatnot, into the archaic Crystal Castle mentality of the NC2A, and some movement has been made, and Braden has been blessed to have the most time to read it, as he was somewhere with the internet while the other two of us were not. So Braden, what are your thoughts on the initial on this initial release?
I'll read a quick excerpt for those who haven't heard really much about the issue. This is from Dan Murphy at ESPN. Says that the NCAA's top decision makers voted unanimously Tuesday to start the process of modifying its rules to allow college athletes to profit from their names, images, and likeness. And this plan to kind of get the NCAA in order in terms of its rules and ordinances around player likeness is set to be finished by January of 2021. So just over a year from now. So, I think this is a great move, even the statement cites that, they'd like student athletes to have the same opportunities as regular students at universities to profit off their name and likeness. So I think this is a great move from the NCAA, and it's nice to see, obviously, Ohio State President Michael Drake part of this, and Gene Smith, and even former Ohio State player Anthony Gonzalez helping to kind of support some bills here.
2021 is moving at a rapid pace in terms of the NC2A calendar. Definitely not fast enough in the eyes of some of the lawmakers out there. There are so many pitfalls that are out there, and I'm not going to get into all those bits and pieces here, or we could be here for another half hour. There's just so many layers to this onion to try and unpeel and figure it out. There's obviously a lot of concerns that this could be abused, but it's definitely the direction that everything's moving. Just sitting here looking at it from 30,000 feet. Your thoughts on it, Keaton?
Yeah, I think that a lot of people recognize that the current system and all the controversy and all the way that people were tugging and pulling, trying to get new things changed, that system could not live on for any longer. So I think that it was good that they moved in a direction that they're going to try to make some change, and that I think that it is a good idea to do it sooner rather than later, just to do it in 2021, start addressing newer problems that will obviously arise with the new system. And I think it was 2 years ahead of the California bill that was supposed to go in 2023. So I think getting ahead of that was also good to avoid that whole California controversy was good. But I think that the NCAA has shown a lack of wanting to change. So I think any kind of time that they make a step towards trying to evolve and try to move into a new direction, I think that's always good. So it'll be interesting to see how this will end up, but I guess we won't find out for a year or so.
And I'll add on to what Keaton said. Gene Smith said earlier today that specifically, he didn't say this, but it was basically in response to the California bill, with Smith saying that the NCAA's new rules would not follow the California model of a virtually unrestricted market, and that the NCAA would work to regulate all of those endorsement deals. So, I think one of the main concerns that I've seen from a lot of people is that kind of the rich will get richer in terms of students going to these, big-time programs where they're going to get, the most money from marketing deals and whatever it may be. But I think this could work in kind of the opposite way here with smaller schools, or maybe schools that don't recruit as well, getting more opportunities for players due to their existence in a big media market. You look at Northwestern, who has not always been the greatest recruiter. Chicago is the third biggest media market in the United States. So if players suddenly, if Alabama is full up on their scholarship limit for the season, and a player can see, Northwestern not only provides me with an opportunity to play football, but to exist in a big media market where I can profit off my name and likeness, that may be kind of the way recruiting starts to go moving forward.
And of course, California lawmakers came out on the heels of this and said that they are not really down with where the NC2A is on this. They want full, unrestricted, unfettered access to whatnot. So the plot will continue. Quick question here: we all like to play video games. I think everybody does. Ed O'Bannon killed one of the greatest video game franchises with his tomfoolery, and NC2A football died at that point. What year are we going to see the first NC2A football game out? If this NC2A stuff isn't supposed to really be there until January 21 or whatnot, Twitter is a buzz with people saying, why isn't the game already out today? What year do we start playing that game again?
Yeah, I think after everything goes into motion, I'd say like 2022, 2023 would kind of be where I'd be leaning towards. I think people are going to be wanting the 2021 game to be out, but I don't think that's realistic. So I think that the hope is finally there for people who love that video game. I mean, Braden and I, the first thing we started talking about before we started this podcast was that the video game is going to be back. So I think that's big news for people who like that, but I think that you're going to have to be a little bit more patient. It's not going to be immediate, but I think it's definitely on the horizon.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is kind of getting into some nerdy territory here, but the last NCAA football game came out kind of right as the next generation of consoles and the Xbox One and PS4 was coming out. So as the kind of next generation of consoles is prepared to come out, I agree with Keaton. I don't think we will see it at minimum until 2022 because I think, as much as it would be fun to have it in 2021, it's going to take some time for them to get all of those assets back up to order to kind of what we expect from video games now in terms of like graphics and Madden or whatever it may be. So I think it will be back, but it's going to take some time for them to get everything in order with, the bureaucratic, whatever it may take to actually get, kind of pen to paper on getting everything in order here.
Well, I'm going to even get nerdier than you right there and say that I agree that 2022 seems to be the year. Well, PS5, the Xbox, Scarlet, I believe, is the project name on there. Doesn't necessarily mean that's what it's going to be called. I bet you whoever the developer is, though, already kind of was working on some stuff on the side and whatnot. They're going to start ramping some stuff up. The dev kit is definitely out for the PS5 at this point. I don't know where the Xbox is, but I'll just tell you, by that point, I'll be 50 plus, but I'll still probably be in line to go get that game. We're going to wrap it up here in a second. We did ask for some questions from our membership on the Horseshoe Lounge. Some of them we're just not going to touch with a 10-foot pole. Some of them were just, we'll try again on our next open podcast. But we do have one that we're going to go to. I'll let Braden start with it.
Thank you to Prince Buck Nasty for the question. Who do you see leaving early for the NFL this season?
For me, I think that there's some obvious names there, and I'm not going to go through all of them and then just have you guys go, yep, I agree, or whatever. J.K. Dobbins, bye. Chase Young, bye. I think that Jeffrey Okuda is another guy that could go early at this point too. But I think there certainly are other names as well, and I'll double back at the tail end of this just with some final thoughts too.
I think Thayer Munford could definitely be a name in consideration here. That's the talk has maybe cooled off a bit the last few weeks with kind of the injuries he's gone through and some of the difficulties he's had playing. So, it'll remain to be seen kind of, if he ends up, kind of struggling with injuries for the remainder of the season and kind of wants to have a second shot at things next year, he may return. But as it stands, it looks like he has the talent to definitely move on this season.
And I think the interesting one would be Sean Wade, just because of the difference in what his decision could be. If he goes pro, then, obviously he'd be in the NFL, he'd be making money. But if he comes back, you would expect him to be the number one cornerback. He'd be having a different role in the defense. Instead of being the slot corner, he'd be the number one. So I think that would be an interesting thing for Ohio State fans because they're going to lose a lot on the defense. So it would be nice to have some of the more experienced players to come back, especially in that secondary that's going to lose a lot. So, it's hard to predict the future, but I agree with Kevin and the J.K. Dobbins thing. I think J.K. will definitely be gone, Chase, obviously. But, it'll be interesting to see how Ohio State can reload and just who they're not going to have to reload with some of the younger guys next year.
I think one of the things to keep an eye on, too, is if we're talking about a team that does end up winning the national championship, if you're draft eligible, there could be a mass exodus at that point, too. You've won your title. Your stock may not be any higher. I don't think people have to look back to, Cardale Jones coming out of the championship game. I don't know if I agree that he was a late first-round pick, to be honest, but, some people out there believe it. And, he gave a great answer recently about that it was important for him to come back and finish his degree, but the university has so many programs in place to, for degree completion for their athletes and whatnot, and not just restricted to football that, it's all there at that point. So I think that you could see, a pretty nice movement out. I mean, that's not nice if you're an Ohio State fan, but I think you could see a lot of guys, decide to test the waters at that point. The one thing with offensive line, I think that, you definitely have limited tread on your tires at some point, and you may want to get out there and try stuff, but you're also then at that point getting tested and prodded by all the medical staff and whatnot. And of all the positions, I think offensive line is one of the hardest ones to leave early and for it really to work, just because, it's so hard to project offensive linemen going from high school to college. It's so hard to project offensive linemen going from college to the pros. I mean, there have been some really good collegiate linemen who've come out of Ohio State, well thought of going into the NFL, and maybe their careers haven't gone as expected. Conversely, I don't know if people necessarily saw Pat Elflein being the guy that he is in the league. I don't know if people would have seen, Jack Buhort, who, had his career cut short, but I mean, he had a nice run. Andrew Norwell. I mean, we can kind of go through some guys that, did stay, and maybe, they certainly are getting, the opportunity to play a lot in college. Whereas, if you don't get that spot, as a starter in the pro game, where do you really develop at that point, on a 53-man roster? So it'll be interesting. We've gone almost 36 minutes at this point, so it's about time that we wrap it up. So I'm going to just put it in for one final round of final thoughts.
I guess just leaning off what you guys were saying about your biggest concern, I'm really interested to see when Ohio State runs into that test, how they perform in the clutch, because when the expectations are weighing on you and the game is winding down and everything that all the goals that you've set for the season are on the line, I want to see how Ohio State will execute and how aggressive Ryan Day will coach the game. I mean, you have Lincoln Riley, one of the best offensive minds. When he got into that Rose Bowl against Georgia and they got that big lead, he almost played not to win, or he played not to lose instead of trying to win the game. So I want to see how Ryan Day will approach a tight situation and how aggressive he'll be. And I think we'll get to see that against Penn State, and if not, maybe Michigan. But I'm very interested to see how Ohio State responds to that.
Yeah, as evidenced by Keaton not mentioning them, I think the next few weeks with kind of Maryland and Rutgers are just going to be very run-of-the-mill. I mean, this is really going to test Ryan Day's, what he's kind of been preaching this year, of focusing on your current opponent and not having the guys sneaking in Penn State film study when the coaches aren't looking. So it's going to be interesting to see kind of how they perform against these opponents. I mean, obviously they're going to win, but it'll be interesting to see how much they win by, kind of how much they can execute, knowing they have much bigger, they're much bigger and better opponents on the horizon.
I just want to see how this team deals with the noise. I mean, we talked about it a little bit earlier. Three Buckeyes going to New York. I think we know better than that's not going to necessarily happen. It's been Ndamukong Suh was the last defensive player to get invited to New York in 2009, and I believe he ended up finishing fourth. So I don't know if Chase Young is going to get enough of the preliminary vote to get the trip out there, but there's going to be a lot of talk about these guys, and just kind of doubling back on what we said. I mean, it's hard to escape all of that. So I'll be interested to see how the leadership, how the program is going to do a good enough job of keeping all of that in check, making sure that they don't go crazy with all the talk there, and then just focusing on the task at hand. Because yes, the next two games nobody's talking about them much. Nobody was talking about Illinois that much when it came to Wisconsin. Granted, Ohio State's next road game is at Rutgers, and well, there's that. I'm not going to go for the low-hanging fruit there, but I want to thank Braden and Keaton for joining me here on this BIA podcast. You can always hear us after every game, and if you like these, be sure to let us know in the thread, and we'll try and do some of these non-event ones a little bit more often, just to keep everything going. But once again, thanks for listening, and have a great day.
Be sure to stay up to date with Buckeye Grove Instant Access when the news breaks or after the big game. Exclusively at BuckeyeGrove.com or anytime on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher as part of the Unscripted Ohio Podcast Network. Hit that subscribe button so you can stay in the know and never miss a single episode.